This is the third video for the study day at St Benet's on why Christians need the Old Testament. The first two videos, looking at the Old Testament and history and the Old Testament and literature, are available on our YouTube channel, and you can find out more information about the Learning and Formation Programme and life at St Benet's on our website, stbenetschurch.org.
Part 3. Give me understanding according to your word, the Old Testament and theology. The Old Testament is a body of theological literature endowed with distinctive importance within the Christian faith. But is it good theology we mutter under our breath? Doesn't the Old Testament command to kill your enemies rather than love them? Doesn't the Old Testament bear witness to a God of wrath rather than a God of love? Doesn't the Old Testament base our relationship with God on law rather than grace? Isn't the Old Testament at odds with so much of what we consider central to the Christian faith? Throughout the history of the Church, this suspicion of the Old Testament, if not outright opposition to it, has been simmering under the surface, occasionally boiling over. An extreme example of this sentiment is Marcion of Sinope, who lived in the 2nd century. Marcion went as far as to champion a complete removal of the Old Testament from the canon of Scripture, together with certain parts of the New Testament that he regarded as too Jewish. For Marcion, the God who sent Jesus into the world was emphatically not the God of the Old Testament or Judaism. It was a different, higher, better deity. The Church Fathers denounced Marcion as a heretic, and he was eventually excommunicated. And yet, some of his beliefs, I think, have not gone away and still haunt us in the Church even to this day. I do not think it would be an overstatement to say that various forms of supersessionism, from mild to fairly extreme, are widespread in the Church today. Supersessionism may be defined as the belief that the Church replaces Israel and that the New Testament supersedes the Old. The 39 Articles of Religion, one of the Anglican formularies, devote a special article to the Old Testament. The Old Testament is not contrary to the New, for both in the Old and New Testament, everlasting life is offered to mankind by Christ, who is the only mediator between God and man, being both God and man. I welcome the ringing endorsement of the Old Testament, of course, but it is disappointing that even more than 1,000 years after Marcion, such a defense of the Old Testament was still required. And, alas, it is still necessary even in our day. As an Old Testament scholar, I often wonder, of course, why we need the New Testament. Why is the Old Testament not enough? I'm being deliberately provocative. We certainly need the New Testament, but there is a grain of truth in this line of questioning, insofar as the Old Testament makes a far greater contribution to our theology than we might imagine or even be willing to admit. Very little in the New Testament would make sense without the Old Testament. In fact, as a sidebar, it is not only the Old Testament that we need for understanding the thought world of the New Testament, but also Second Temple Judaism. The theology of the New Testament, after all, emerges from the diverse historical, literary, and theological contexts of late Second Temple Judaism, rather than springing directly from the Old Testament. But this takes us well beyond our study day. Returning to the subject of the Old Testament, I even find the label we attach to this literary corpus, the Old Testament, deeply problematic. To be honest, I'm not a big fan of that adjective, old. Not only does it have mildly anti-Semitic overtones, but it is also potentially misleading for Christians, to the extent that it may be interpreted as suggesting that the New Testament cancels and replaces the Old. By contrast, my view is that the New Testament is best understood as a targeted, pointed intervention that addresses a range of key issues that the Old Testament leaves unresolved, such as the Messiah or the place of the Gentiles in God's purposes. However, it would not be fair to say that the New Testament redesigns the foundations from scratch. It continues to operate within the conceptual universe of the Old Testament, while developing and reimagining, sometimes dramatically, certain themes within it. I do not think there is necessarily a satisfactory alternative to the term the Old Testament, but I want to register a certain degree of unease with it. Personally, I often prefer to talk of the Hebrew Bible, certainly in the academic environment, but even in Christian context too. For the Apostle Paul, or indeed Jesus, the Old Testament was just the scriptures. Historically, there has been a range of responses to this issue, the relationship between the Old Testament and the New, or the place of the Old Testament in Christianity. And these responses tend to vacillate between two poles: seamless continuity and radical discontinuity. We have just discussed the perception of radical discontinuity, of which Marcion is one example. But what about seamless continuity, which we find on the opposite end of the spectrum? The assertion of seamless continuity between the New Testament and the Old Testament manifests itself in two key ways. First of all, we catch glimpses of this perspective in the writings of Paul. Think of Romans or Galatians. According to some influential currents within the early church, Christianity was nothing more than a sect of Judaism. In his writings, Paul decisively responded to such Judaizers and largely put their teachings to rest. We may not have many Judaizers in the 21st century, but this does not mean that the perception of seamless continuity has vanished. These days, instead of Judaizing the New Testament, many Christians are busy Christianizing the Old Testament. Along these lines, many of us have a proclivity to find Jesus or the gospel in every conceivable text in the Old Testament. While I appreciate the thought behind this, surely this is better than throwing the Old Testament out of the window, I do not think we do justice to the Old Testament if we simply fold it into the New. It seems to me that we would do well to steer clear of both extremes. The Old Testament was ultimately Jesus' scripture, and his only scripture at that. Jesus came not to destroy the law and the prophets, but to fulfill them. At the same time, there is no denying that Jesus introduces a radical change. He talks about new wineskins. No one put new wine into old wineskins. The interplay between tradition and innovation here is complex, but perhaps we should imagine the sort of newness and innovation that builds upon, develops and deepens earlier traditions, as opposed to replacing, cancelling or subverting them. In what follows, I would like to shed a bit more light on one of the towering contributions that the Old Testament makes to Christian theology, namely the covenant. The covenant reverberates throughout the entire Old Testament and is one of the most influential concepts it bequeathed to Christianity and the modern world in general. The very word testament is simply the Latin translation of the Greek word for covenant. By putting the spotlight on the covenant, there will also be ample opportunity for us to bring together the three strands of this study day: history, literature, and theology. The biblical notion of a covenant has its background in ancient Near Eastern treaties. Thanks to the discoveries of the last century, we now have access to a significant corpus of such treaties. Two clusters of these documents are especially important for our purposes: Hittite treaties from around 1200 BC, as well as Assyrian treaties from the 8th century BC. These treaties are known as Vassal or Suzerainty treaties. They center on the submission of one party, the vassal, to the other, the suzerain or the sovereign. These treaties include certain stipulations, that is, terms of the treaty or laws, as well as blessings and curses that specify the consequences of obedience and disobedience. Does this sound at all familiar? The parallels to a range of texts in the Old Testament are nothing if not striking. The demand for exclusive allegiance to Yahweh in Exodus chapter 20 verse 3, "You shall have no other gods before me," corresponds unmistakably and directly to the demands that Hittite and Assyrian rulers placed on their subjects. Or consider the book of Deuteronomy that enjoins Israel to love their God. In certain Assyrian treaties, subjects are likewise commanded to love their Lord. Here is a quote from one of them: "If you do not love the crown prince designate Ashurbanipal as you do your own lives, ... So copious are the parallels here and in many other places that they leave no doubt that the biblical authors borrowed, conceptually and literarily, from ancient Near Eastern treaties. Mesopotamian literature and culture had a profound influence on Israel, and their appropriation of this vassal treatise and loyalty oath is a remarkable example of that fruitful cultural exchange. But something truly fascinating is going on at the same time. Far from simply borrowing ideas from their neighbors, the Israelites also reconceived them. There is an important and unique point of innovation here. Ancient Israel repurposed the idea of the covenant, relocating it from the political sphere to the religious realm. At some point, Israel began to think of its relationship with its national God, Yahweh, in terms of a treaty or a covenant. Yahweh imposed on Israel a relationship of loyalty. Obedience to Yahweh would be rewarded, blessings, whereas disobedience would incur punishment, curses. No other ancient Near Eastern culture, so far as we know, applied this political concept to religion. Indeed, biblical law as a whole is quite unique to the extent that it is the national deity of Israel that is imagined as the lawgiver. This is not common. We have the laws of Hammurabi, but not the laws of Hammurabi's gods. Kings, not gods, took on the role of promulgating laws. This unique adaptation of the widespread Near Eastern concept of the covenant was also probably quite subversive. Many scholars are of the opinion that Deuteronomy, or an early version thereof, was composed when Judah was an Assyrian vassal. If this be the case, then it is quite plausible that Deuteronomy intends to articulate a subversive alternative to the Assyrian loyalty oath and reject Assyrian lordship. The people of Judah are to pledge their loyalty not to the king of Assyria, but to Yahweh. When Deuteronomy chapter 6 verses 4 to 6, the great Shema proclaim, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind." This is not a theoretical statement of monotheism. It is about loyalty and allegiance. In fact, Deuteronomy probably fully accepts that other gods exist and indeed pose a real threat to Israel, but the Israelite is to remain loyal to Yahweh alone. Scholars call this monolatry, the worship of only one God, rather than monotheism, belief in the existence of only one God. What this discussion highlights, among other things, is that Israel deliberately broke with its neighbors in imagining its God as a covenantal suzerain and a lawgiver. Israel did not simply borrow ideas floating in the intellectual air around it, but innovated greatly upon them. I wonder what it says about the character of our God. From all accounts, that he is a sovereign and a lawgiver who demands our complete allegiance and obedience is not an afterthought or some general ancient cultural feature that can be explained away. It is an outcome of profound and inspired theological reflection. As Gentile Christians, we may not be under the authority of the Mosaic law in the same way Israel was, but let us not dismiss it as theologically irrelevant. Understanding ancient Near Eastern treaties and their relationship to the Old Testament proves illuminating. But the literary features of the pertinent biblical materials also matter. So, for example, it would not be correct to say that Deuteronomy is structured as a treaty text. Instead, it is presented as a speech or a homily, a direct farewell address that Moses is portrayed as delivering to the Israelites as they stand on the threshold of the promised land. What difference does this literary form make to our understanding of the covenant in the book of Deuteronomy? I invite you to reflect on that. The covenant is foundational to the New Testament. We often seem to think that the New Testament trades on universal ideas and ideals. Such notions as human sin or redemption that Jesus Christ accomplishes seem almost self-evident to us. To be sure, sin and suffering and even hopes of liberation may be universal human experiences, but the New Testament functions within a conceptual framework largely shaped by the Old Testament. Jesus comes as the Jewish Messiah. He puts an end to the exile, and the exile is a covenant curse that Israel incurred when it broke the Mosaic covenant. In his life, death, and resurrection, Jesus undoes and reverses covenant curses. he inaugurates a new covenant. This influence of the covenant as a concept extends far beyond the New Testament. In many branches of Christian theology, such as the Reformed tradition, it becomes the main organizing principle of theology. It is also foundational to such theological ideas as participation in God and union with Christ. Even modern political thought is heavily indebted to the covenant, inasmuch as we construe our relationship with the government in contractual or vaguely covenantal terms. Other examples, of course, abound. And so we come to the end of the study day. I would like to conclude with an encouragement. Here is what Brevard Childs, one of the most prominent Old Testament scholars of the 20th century, says about the Old Testament. I do not come to the Old Testament to learn about someone else's God, but about the God we confess, who has made himself known to Israel, to Abraham, Isaac, and to Jacob. I do not approach some ancient concept, some mythological construct akin to Zeus or Moloch, but our God, our Father. The Old Testament bears witness that God revealed himself to Abraham, and we confess that he has broken into our lives too. I do not come to the Old Testament to be informed about some strange religious phenomenon, but in faith I strive for knowledge as I seek to understand ourselves in the light of God's self-disclosure. In the context of the Church's scripture, I seek to be pointed to our God, who has made himself known, is making himself known, and will make himself known.